How will China behave once it becomes the leading power? As I mentioned in the introduction, of course, if you measure purchasing power parity, China became the largest economic power in 2014. But it's often assumed that it would pursue a hegemonic system like the United States, and this is usually where you find the split. Will China be distinctively different, or will it become or strive to become yet another hegemon?
So yeah, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. I mean, there's no aspiration in China to export its political system, so that's not going to happen. I mean, if other countries are willing to learn aspects of it, that's fine. And China might help with training and education in that respect. But the idea that China would want to export its political system, which is recognized by intellectuals as and political reformers as really distinctive to China because of its size and its political culture and its national conditions, that's not going to happen. So that's complete, this the idea that China will want to do that, I think is a misunderstanding. As mentioned, and also if you look at what is taught in schools and what the leaders say, there's no reason to assume that China would do that. What China might be willing to do, hopefully, is collaborate with other powers on global challenges. I mean, as they're doing now, on issues like climate change and green energy, and later, hopefully on regulation of nuclear weapons, and AI and dealing with pandemics in the future. I mean, the big stumbling block for global cooperation is, of course, now is the United States, not China. Even things like, you know, China doesn't really want to disrupt the political system or whatever maintains stability, is okay if it allows for economic growth and cooperation. So even in like the Asia Pacific, if like, let's say 10 years from now, 20 years from now, an American, government, which is more open to collaboration with China, were to say, let's have joint patrols, military patrols of the Asia Pacific. This sort of thing that China might well be very open to. So that might happen, but China wouldn't unilaterally try to export its political model or exercise military force beyond, what counts as China proper. I mean, it's almost inconceivable. Of course, and that things could happen, but it's highly, highly unlikely. It's strange. I was just in Australia, and I was fascinated to learn that ever since like the early 19th century, there's been this fear of Australia, of China invading Australia. It just seems so crazy to me, but that's still there. And in Australia, how could they believe that? But it rests partly on misunderstanding of China, and maybe even partly like on some element of racism. I mean, otherwise it's hard to understand.
Yeah, I used to work in Australia for 14 years, and
Yeah,
in the past they had this they called it the yellow peril. That is, there were this
right,
little
right.
European outpost in Asia with this massive Asian giants around them. So this is kind of what informed their foreign policy. That is, do whatever the British do because we have to link ourselves to them. And then, of course, when the US took over the hegemon of the world, then link itself as closely to the US. Now, of course, Australia has changed. I'm not suggesting otherwise, and its economy is it's attempted to make itself into this European history, but Asian geography. This kind of the mentality that you shouldn't have to choose between China and the U.S. But you still see throughout their politics, though, that is the Chinese might be coming for us. We need the Indonesia as a shield. We need the American bases here. It's better if we weaken China because otherwise you don't know what's going to happen
Yeah.
in the future.
And the educational system too. I mean, I was shocked to learn that there's like hardly anybody at the major universities who teach, Chinese philosophy and political culture. I mean, how can you understand the country without that?
Well, I'm a bit optimistic with what you said because with China's own experience, because you mentioned when they only looked for power, they had this short-lived government, so 15 years before it collapses. And this is a common theme in international relations, though, that is that in victory, great powers often end up defeating themselves because states often can't constrain themselves. This is a key problem. So once the US, of course, came out of the Cold War, the Soviet Union collapsed. It was celebrated as victory, but as prominent scholars like Stephen Walt was making, was making the argument that the problem for the US now was itself. It was this 500-pound gorilla, no one to constrain it, and it didn't seem reasonable that it would be able to constrain itself. So what would you expect? It would begin to expand in every direction, would engage in recklessness, and after a while, all of the cost would begin to accrue, and it would end up tearing down the United States. Now, I think this is it's not just about the United States, of course. This is a problem, the cost of hegemony. No, it is interesting though if you think China has the internal characteristics to, I guess, moderate and limit its power ambitions. Just as a quick note, there used to be said the same about the US. If you look at economists like Friedrich List, he was making the point back in 1827 that the American economic statecraft was only in the name of freedom. They just wanted liberty, freedom, as opposed to British, which was striving for hegemony. And but of course, by 1840s, the sentiment had changed a bit. Now the British should ally with Germany because they had to constrain the sheer power of the United States. So it kind of suggests that power will at some point influence in tensions. Yeah, sorry, just one final question then, because I was thinking in China, I also felt this whole optimism of openness, how this has been rewarding. But I was wondering to what extent this has been the cause of the very favorable past 40 years of openness through globalization, integration into international markets, because this has worked so well for China. It has prospered so greatly. I ask because if the US would be successful in weakening China, essentially cut it down a bit in size, destroy its economy, couldn't this change the entire sentiment in China? I mean, I can imagine China becoming quite angry and resentful compared to this optimistic harmony idea and positive sum gain if the US will be successful in terms of breaking its economy.
Yeah, well, I don't think the US could be successful because, I mean, it's true that China relies on exports and globalization was helpful for that. But China is a huge country and has a huge domestic market, and that's the real core of China's economy. And plus, now there's the Chinese, I mean, I'm not an expert, but are looking much more to the global south for cooperation and for exports. So, okay, but still, let's assume that the US and other powers have the power to weaken China's economy, economic development, and would that lead to more resentment in China? I mean, of course, it would make people more pessimistic. And to a certain extent, it's happening in China where there is, especially among, even though the aspects of the economy, like in AI and so on, and clean energy are doing very well, but it's much harder now for recent university graduates to find jobs. Like where I was dean at the Shandong University, which is a great university with great students, but it was really increasingly harder for students to find jobs after they graduate, and that leads to a certain amount of pessimism compared to like 10 or 20 years ago in China. But who are they going to blame? At the moment, I don't think they're really blaming the Chinese government. I mean, there's a bit of that in 2022 when the excesses of the zero COVID policy became clear, and then there was a lot of resentment. But I don't think it's happening anymore. I mean, people are aware that it's not really the Chinese government that's to blame for China's problems to a major extent. Are they going to blame the US or other countries for trying to squeeze China? I mean, partly, but would it lead to the point that China would want to go to war against the US? I mean, that would be a crazy view, and I think it's highly, highly, highly unlikely.
So before we go, where can people find your work? Because as I started off saying, I love all your books. So are you on any platforms so we should be aware?
Well, you're very kind. And yeah, not really. I mean, in China, everybody uses WeChat, Weixin, but of course, yeah, no, just the usual places, Amazon. So thank you for the, yeah, And my books are published recently, the past, like, I guess, 20 years by Princeton University Press. So they're all available on the Princeton University Press website.
Yeah.
Thank you for
I'll yeah, I will leave a description in the description, a link to the different books. So again, can't recommend it enough. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for the informed and kind commentary and questions.